Hello and welcome to the August 2018 edition of Mytech U, a monthly educational series for technology and business topics. My name is Nathan Austin. I'll be your moderator today. And this month, we will be discussing 4 ways to start leveraging SharePoint. And we're fortunate to have a SharePoint guru, John Horner from Microsoft, who his role at Microsoft is a partner technical consultant that works with companies like Mytech to help us deliver great content to you and help us coaches us on how we can help you leverage SharePoint better and other Microsoft tools. So John's going to lead us through the topic today. So let me add a couple items of context. This has been one of the most asked questions that we've been getting this year around SharePoint, around cloud, around when we've been doing a lot of our Microsoft immersion experiences where we take people on a guided tour through the tools that are available in Office 365. Inevitably, every single one of those sessions, people are asking, well, how can I use SharePoint better? What are some of the things I should think about using SharePoint? What are the low-hanging fruit, if you will? As well as one of the common ways people look at SharePoint is, if I have a file server that that I've traditionally been using, should SharePoint be a replacement for that? If so, well, how should I think about it differently? So we're going to cover some of that stuff today, and whether or not you are listening to us today, thank you for joining us, or whether you're listening to us in the future, this session was specifically put together to help you see some of the low-hanging fruit and some of the simple ways you can start leveraging SharePoint. And one other piece of information is, and John and I collaborated on this, and that the slide deck and the actual data that's presented is going to be more than what we're actually going to cover in detail in the session. We did that intentionally because we want you to be able to come back to the recording and reference the deck, which we will share with everyone, so that you can go back, if you're working on it internally, you can have a point of reference that you can then go back, so you don't have to necessarily take notes. So we add a lot more in the presentation or in the slide deck than we're going to be able to cover in the 45 minutes. But we wanted to put that in there so you know we're intentionally skipping over some items, and John will reference that as he goes through. All right, so one last housekeeping item. Before we turn the presentation over to John, a couple notes. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. We are recording this presentation, as I mentioned, and it will be available within 24 hours after the presentation. You will all get a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording. The audience is on mute. However, if you have a question, please use the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will do our best to either interject the question into the conversation, or we will follow up with you individually afterwards. With that said, John, please introduce yourself and lead us through the presentation.
Thanks, Nate. As Nate said, my name is John Horner. I'm with my title is a partner technical consultant here at Microsoft, specializing in Office 365. I started at Microsoft back in 2010 as a SharePoint Online break-fix support engineer. So back in 2010, we had 2007 technologies on the back end. We called things BPOS, or Business Productivity Online Suite. I stayed on that team through the transition to what we now call Office 365, which had 2010 technologies on the back end. Before transitioning over to my role on my current team as a partner technical consultant, where I still specialize in SharePoint, but have kind of broadened my knowledge to have pretty good understanding of Exchange, Skype, and all the aspects of all the tools that go in with Office 365. So as Nate mentioned, today we're going to talk about SharePoint Online, and we're talking about kind of 4 ways that we're thinking of using and leveraging the power of the cloud and the power of SharePoint Online. So the first thing normally is let people are like, okay, if they're wanting to go to Office 365, want to go to SharePoint Online, what do they want to do? Well, they want to move their file server off their current infrastructure and move it into the cloud. So there's a couple of things that we have to kind of bear in mind, and some ways that we would work differently with files if they were in SharePoint Online in the cloud. So we'll kind of quickly take a look at kind of comparisons and differences of what we have. So in a traditional file server infrastructure, you have a physical server that's somewhere in your office, or maybe in somebody else's data center, or something where the files are stored on. So then we have inside that, we've probably got a folder that is for shared files. That's for the entire company. Inside of that, there's probably folders that contain documents for human resources, marketing, sales, IT, etc. And then they probably have nested folders inside of those, which have nested folders inside of those, and so forth. When we move to the cloud or move to SharePoint Online, now we're talking, rather than a nested look of folders, which we can still do. We think more of a top-down hierarchy. So we have an intranet. We're in the cloud, so we have a website for people to go to. We call that a company intranet, or whatever you want to call it. It can have these document libraries that hold documents. It can have a custom list that is kind of like an Excel file, but it's in a list on a page. It can have picture libraries, video libraries. It can have calendars. It can have task lists to help you manage tasks. So this entire location, this company intranet, compares to this shared files location, but in the shared files, all you're having is files. You don't get to have a task list there or a calendar. That can really kind of just be a landing page for your company to come out, find information they're looking for, and maybe find them in a little bit different ways. So if we think of the picture library or the video library, rather than just seeing a document that looks like, oh, hey, the title is picture of dog, we actually can see a thumbnail of the dog. So it gives it a little better end user experience. Some of these libraries can have nested folders in them, some of them can't. And then we kind of think of going down a level or creating another level of websites that can be for that HR department or the marketing department, sales department, etc. Those top level folders you might have in your file share. But here again, they're full functioning websites. So besides HR just having a place to store documents, they can have their own calendar. They can have their own picture library. They can have their own task list to help them manage tasks and things of that nature that they're working on. Through permissions, like we normally do in a file server, we kind of block whether people can see a file or open a file, things of that nature. In SharePoint, we would do the same thing. We would want HR to have full access to this HR site, but we can still give the rest of the company some access to be able to come in and see things that are relevant to them. Maybe there's some announcements, maybe it's tax time, so there's information for them to go find out what they need to get their W-2, etc. We also then, in that physical file server, there's probably an H drive or a home drive that people have mapped to their local machine. And a lot of people think it's maybe even just saving it on their machine when they click it, but it's really saving back to this physical box somewhere within their local area network. OneDrive for Business is that equivalent. Now, it's important to understand that there's two different kinds of OneDrive, and I guess we kind of gotten to the point where we like to name things the same and maybe make it confusing for users here at Microsoft. But there's OneDrive that is a consumer version of OneDrive that you get free with like a hotmail.com or outlook.com email address. That's completely different than OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is a special SharePoint Online site collection that is dedicated to an end user.
Hey, John, one of the things that,
Yep.
go back one slide real quick, just one click. One of the things that, an example that we've encountered recently that helps people have a better visibility. A lot of times people have payroll systems and PTO things that track PTO, but at a department level, sometimes it's difficult to see who's actually taking PTO in one single view, like in a calendar type view.
Yep.
So we've actually seen, and we've done this for different teams in Mytech, is like you kind of have the HR bucket and the marketing bucket, et cetera, is that the calendar is it's either a calendar that, like for marketing, a calendar that you can share events that are coming up, so the sales team just has a place to go to have visibility to it, for example, or it could be just a PTO calendar. Just to give a couple examples of where, so a department manager can have quick visibility to, oh, here's the PTO that's been approved, so that at a glance they don't have to, it's easier to see that as far as approving future PTO requests or knowing what capacity they might have to manage during that time. So those are just a couple examples that we've seen where what you just described it's more than just a folder structure where you can add things like even something as simple as a calendar, where you can use that to give visibility either to the department or to other departments that are interacting with you.
And that's a great point, and something that we'll talk a little bit later on in the session here about using workflows and things of that nature to help you automate some business processes. You can have a time off calendar, if you will, where you just go in and you put your time off that you're taking off, or you can set workflows around that. So in that calendar, I need to request time off, which then will trigger an email to Nate, who would be my time off approver, and Nate has the ability to approve or reject that before it actually becomes time off. So we can build in those processes on the internet calendar, on all of these different levels. And we can have multiple calendars on each level as well. We can have one that is simply going to evangelize what marketing events we have, one for time off for marketing, another one for internal calls, whatever we want. We can have these, and through some special tools, we could roll up all of these calendars in the HR up to the company intranet. So the company intranet could actually see what's going on in the HR calendar, what's going on in the marketing calendar, et cetera, all in one view. And you can kind of drill into those special if you want, or you can aggregate them all up into the top level calendar. So we talked about the nested folders, and kind of one of the reasons we talk about nesting folders and why we don't do it in SharePoint so much is we'll talk about here is, in this example, we have a Word document. We'll say its title is completed Word document. So if we're in our traditional file server infrastructure where we're accessing over a local area network or a LAN, when the Word client tries to open that document from the F drive, it thinks of this stuff in blue, the F:/shared file/marketing/December, as the storage location of the document, and the title of the document as simply being completed Word document. When we're accessing over the internet, accessing from OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, etc., now the Word client thinks of this entire path as the name of the document. And you'll notice in red down here, there's a %, the number 2, and the number 0 for that space between completed and Word and between Word and document. So computer aiders, operating systems, browsers, they hate having spaces and things. They don't know what that means. So they substitute every space with the %, the number 2, and the number 0. So every single character space now is 3 characters. And why is that important? Because computers and operating systems, they have limitations for how long a file's name could be. And as we mentioned, we no longer think of completed Word document as the name of the file. We think of the entire path name. So there is a limitation of 400 characters for OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online. So we want to think about and kind of make a concerted effort not to do extreme folder nesting, because that can make this path name really long. This sounds like a complete horror story. To be honest with you, with 400 characters, most companies don't ever really run into a problem. But if you're used to nesting things 10, 15 folders deep, you could have a problem. Or a lot of legal firms really like to have descriptive names in their document titles. And if we have a 50-character descriptive name in the title and a 50-character descriptive name in a folder and another 50-character descriptive name in a folder above that, it won't take long before we'd run out of those 400 characters. So again, I don't want it to be a horror story, but it's something to bear in mind and think about. So to kind of eliminate those levels, those needs for folders, we have metadata that we can use. Now, metadata can be exposed in the document information panel of your Office documents. It can simply be a column you're added to the library that you're uploading things to. And by having that, we have the ability to excuse me, have everything just be in a single library, and then we decide if we want to filter by older to newer, filter by a certain date, group by a certain when it's been modified, etc. Or if we've added a couple columns like customer name and document type, we can then group our views so they look like a folder, but they're really not a folder. We can expand them like we'd be opening a folder, and we can kind of have them grouped together, but they're really not grouped. They're really not in folders. They're grouped together because of like column, like metadata. And here's a screenshot of kind of the classic experience if you've ever been in the, because SharePoint Online now has a new experience and a classic experience, so they do look different sometimes. Now, there's also some boundaries and limits that we have to think about. Main thing is, how much storage space do you have? And we should have plenty of storage space for everything we got. If you need more storage space, you can always purchase additional storage space. But one of the big things is characters that aren't allowed to be in file names. So if you look at the screen, we've got the double quote, the asterisk or the star, the colon, those left and right arrow pointy looking things. These all mean something to a computer, mean something in the path, the URL path that we were going out to the internet. So we don't want to have these. They're not allowed to be in titles of our files. Now, there's good, bad, or indifferent. You think of it as an improvement, a drawback, whatever it is. If we upload a file to SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business now that contains one of these, SharePoint Online simply eliminates that character. In the past, it would be an error message. If you're trying to bulk upload a lot of files, you would maybe have some issues trying to figure out which file didn't get uploaded. Now we simply eliminate that character and actually upload the file. There's also some things when it comes to file and folder names, things like OGS, PRN, null. These are again folders that mean something to operating systems. So we're not allowed to have folders named that, and you're not allowed to have any folder name begin with a tilde. And just as a best practice, you probably don't want to have your folders begin with an underscore either. It makes it a little more difficult on SharePoint to keep track of them. File types, we've now opened it up so there are no restrictions on file types that you can add to SharePoint Online, so you can add whatever file types you'd like. We've talked now kind of what... Yep, go ahead.
Before you go, yeah, no problem. So before you go that, I just want to put it all in context as far as part of the reason why it's important that John went through those restrictions is that in theory, you can take what you've traditionally done on your file server and move it over to SharePoint, but there are some idiosyncrasies and things that have to be done differently, like those requirements and those restrictions that John just mentioned. And B, there's actually some, if you think through it a little differently to the slide right before that one, with the metadata, and you actually can create and define new and better ways for your team to actually interact with the data and with the files and find them faster, search capabilities faster, tag information. So part of it is being aware of it so that you can be intentional about it, but just to give you a better experience and really take advantage of some of the capabilities that you can get in SharePoint that you can't get in a file server. So again, it sounds really overwhelming. Make baby steps. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to provide a lot of the context here so that you could start thinking through it, or that as you're looking to make those changes, we can work with you, of course, on some of these things, but that you just put that in context relative to your file and data sets. So yep. That's all I want to hit, John, is just that, it's part of it is being aware of these idiosyncrasies, and the other part is how can you actually drive value from you leveraging the capabilities.
Right, and then this is completely not in this session here, but as we start using metadata and things of that nature, we can then use that metadata to use some of the more advanced features to help us decide that maybe something is confidential, something contains personal information, and because of that, SharePoint can apply some different permissions, different things to it to help us lock those down, to kind of help us prevent the loss of data. So now, OneDrive, I mentioned that SharePoint Online or OneDrive Business is a special SharePoint site dedicated to an end user. So there are some differences between these things. So similar to, if you think back to your H drive and the shared files folder within your file server, OneDrive for Business is for your files, and SharePoint Online is for company files. And now because it's in the cloud, you no longer have to VPN into your corporate network to access them, things of that nature. You can access them over the cloud. But it's important to understand that OneDrive for Business is for personal files, and SharePoint Online is for your company files. Both can be shared with people inside and outside your organization, but here's where the big difference resides. In OneDrive for Business, the end user, controls what content is shared with whom. They control what content's uploaded. They control what permission levels they give out when they share. In SharePoint Online, it's the company, the administrators of that site, that have the control over it. Another difference is that OneDrive, the user interface exposes just a single document library, and because of that, we only can share folders or individual files. And when we're sharing folders or individual files at that level, the only permissions we have that we can give are either view or edit, and edit by inheritance would give people the ability to delete that content if you gave them edit capabilities. So within SharePoint Online, we can administer permissions at a larger container level, whether it be the site or the entire list or library, that holds the folders and documents. We can administer them, making it a little bit easier, but it also gives us the ability to have a broader permission level available. So we can give something like the edit permission, but take away the user's ability to delete content. And more than just document storage, we'll just kind of run through this real quickly, but I tell a story sometimes about if you move the SharePoint Online simply because you want a file server in the cloud is like buying a Lamborghini simply because you want a way to get to work that's 2 blocks away. You need to use the tool. If you use the tools in SharePoint Online, you can have things that can help you manage the life cycle of a document, from curating to maintain to archive, through workflows or just some out-of-box things. Business process flow, and we'll talk a little bit more about workflows towards the end here, that we can create requests and things of that nature and help SharePoint Online help us automate. We can have task and timeline management that we mentioned at the first few slides, where in this example, building a house, you pour the foundation, frame the structure, maybe do some interior construction, all that, and you can put timelines and due dates for these things. And then with business intelligence, we have the ability with the SharePoint Online where we can combine SharePoint Online list data with maybe some data from an on-premises SQL instance and maybe even another Excel file, and we can combine all this data into a pretty report that we have available in the cloud with Power BI. Sharing and permissions, I won't go through this too much, but these are just screenshots of, if I'm sharing at a site level, you can see that we have a bunch of permission levels that we're going to add people into that give them, that's where we give those edit without the ability to delete. If we're sharing at a folder or document level, all we have is we get to choose whether they can view or edit the file. Sharing from the web, sharing from the Office application, we can do from both places. Again, this would be sharing at that folder document level, so it's only view and edit. And something with Outlook 2016, when we have Office 365 and SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business in the mix, is we have something called cloud attachments. So we would have the ability for, in your email, if you could search for a web location and you can attach share a file as a link, a OneDrive link. So rather than the file actually being in the email as an attachment going out to Nathan, I can send him a cloud attachment, and Nathan then has to come back to my SharePoint infrastructure to view the file. So I can make him authenticate, etc. We can give it, anyone can edit view. This would be an anonymous sharing. We have organization edit view. That would be, in my instance, anybody that's a part of Microsoft could edit a view, or recipients can edit and view, meaning I sent the file to Nate, so only Nate could edit and view it. And then if you share from your PC, so you're sharing, you're going to attach something that's locally on your computer, you are prompted, would you like to upload this to OneDrive and share it as a cloud attachment? And then because we've got OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online in the mix, that allows us to do things like live co-authoring and really ramp up our collaboration when we're working on documents. Now, we've got things in the cloud, and most people like working how they're working now. They're used to going to their File Explorer and finding that the shared files are going to their File Explorer and finding their H drive. So with that now, in Windows 10, post what was called the Fall Creators Update from last fall, or would be build 1709 if one of those geeky guys that likes to talk about the builds of Windows 10 that you're on. Post 1709, we have what's called OneDrive Files on Demand. And what this gives us is the capability to set up our files so that we can create a connection and synchronize content from Office 365, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business to our local machine, so they'll show up in our File Explorer, kind of like our map drives would. They'd have a cloud icon or a building icon for the company files. Now, the big difference between Files on Demand and the old OneDrive for Business Sync Client or SkyDrive or SharePoint Online Workspace or Groove.exe, if you want to go way back in the annals of ways for us to synchronize content from SharePoint, is that with Files on Demand, when we synchronize, we actually are only keeping kind of placeholder within that folder saying, hey, this file's available in the cloud, because if it has a little cloud icon like I'm showing here, it's an online only file. This file's available in the cloud. It's not on your machine yet. If you want it, you got to click it and open it, but it will download and open. So we in essence, we can have our entire SharePoint infrastructure available through File Explorer on our machine, but we have to have internet connectivity to get it, and it doesn't take up the entire space on our machine. So once we click and open it, it now becomes what's called a locally available file. So we opened it now. We had to download it to our machine. It's available. We can open it. It's going to have the little icon that looks like a green circle with a check mark in it that's kind of white. That means that we've opened it. It's now locally. At some point in time in the future, if we don't open this file for a while, don't do anything with it, it will automatically convert back to being a cloud-only file. So we're going to try to keep save space on your machine. If we want it to be on our machine, we can always then right-click on the file and choose to always keep on this device. That will mean it'll download, it'll stay here. You still have that connection with the cloud, so any changes that were made by somebody else get synchronized with you. Any changes you make get synchronized back up. And if at any time you need to free up space, you can always just click on the option to free up space, and it will free up space. They'll take those files off your machine, but retain that kind of connection. So if you do have this on demand, how do you turn it? Well, you just kind of right click on either white or blue cloud. It'll either pop up the little blue box where you have to click the settings icon, or it'll pop up a gray box where you click settings. Then you would either go to the settings of that box and click the save space and download files as you need them checkbox, or just simply click turn on if you get the blue, more user-friendly dialog. And that is what's going to open up. It's going to synchronize, or it won't actually synchronize, but it'll start that connection process so that you can look like you have in this screenshot, 1.37 terabytes of data is the size of this resource documents folder, but you have actually 0 bytes taken up on your machine. So you can little by little work through those. If you know that you're going to be going somewhere that's not going to have internet connectivity, grandma's house, something like that, that's where you would right click on a file and say, hey, I want to always keep this on my device. So you could go to grandma's for Thanksgiving, work on your document, come back, get back home from grandma's, connect to the internet, and your changes will synchronize back up to the cloud. So those are most kind of the two most common ways of how do we baby steps getting into the cloud, move our file server stuff into the cloud. And we also want to think about when we're doing that, think of it almost as a spring cleaning type scenario. You may have stuff that's been on your file server for 25 years and you don't need it there. Well, then, if you find out you don't need it, there's no need for you to move it to SharePoint. That can take some time, so a lot of people just want to move everything up there, and we'll make a decision later if we need to get rid of the content. The nice thing about SharePoint is we can do with some retention and things of that nature. We can set so that SharePoint will make sure we keep things around for 10 years or whatever, or we can set SharePoint to make sure that we get rid of things after 10 years or 15 years, and you make those decisions. You kind of handle those settings. So now, the next step maybe would be to start leveraging SharePoint to collaborate with those outside of your organization. So making kind of what we consider an extranet. So with that, SharePoint has some sharing features. I'm not going to run through this whole slide, but we really have, you lock down each individual site collection to whether you're going to, no external sharing, meaning this is going to be a completely internal SharePoint site. Only somebody with my contoso.com email address, some licensed user of ours could access it. You could share only with external users in your directory, which is we call it Azure B2B, meaning you're going to upload some users into your Active Directory. When we do that, there's an invitation that goes out, and those users accept the invitation that hey, they're going to collaborate with you, and they're made to create a Azure Active Directory in the cloud so that we can authenticate them to grant them access. But by adding them to your directory, then if I'm trying to share with somebody outside my organization, they have to actually be somebody that's in my directory that the IT department has uploaded, rather than me picking anybody and sending it to John at Hotmail at my whim. Sharing with authenticated users, meaning I can share with John at Hotmail, but John has to sign in to see the document. or I can share with anonymous users, which means I can send a document out to just anybody. So anybody that were to get the email that has that link, if you will, would be able to come back and get that. And there's some other things where we can limit it by, we can whitelist and blacklist domains, so that my company name is Contoso. I can block so that we can't share with Fabricam, or I can whitelist and allow that we only share with Fabricam. So what is an external user? Anybody that is not part of your organization that you would consider that you would need the license to get access to SharePoint. There are authenticated users with Microsoft accounts and authenticated users without Microsoft accounts. So there's two different ways of things go. If I share with John at johnsplumbing.com, John could decide that he wants to accept with a Microsoft account, and there can be a mapping done that John at John's Plumbing is John at Hotmail. Or he could choose to get a one-time access code to be able to see what's going on. That would be only at like a folder or a document level. If you want to share at a site level, that has to have some kind of a Microsoft account, either Hotmail account, or as we talked in the scenario about Azure B2B, where we'll invite John at Fabricam, but then because I'm inviting them, John will get walked through doing some steps to create, to provide the password he's going to use when accessing my content, so that Microsoft knows that it's the right person. We can authenticate that user, etc. And with Azure B2B, if you really want to, you can turn on two-factor authentication and things of that nature, where you can force those users that are coming in to use your two-factor authentication. The nice thing about it is, if they forget their password, they are responsible for being able to reset their own password and things of that nature. There's going to be some self-service password things that go through. Sharing sites with external users. Again, this is one of the things that, for time constraints, we probably aren't going to talk a whole lot about, but in that extranet scenario where you want to collaborate with your either some partner you're collaborating, maybe you have some vendors that you work with, and rather than them sending you bills here and there, you would create maybe an extranet site that you could collaborate with them on, where documents get uploaded and downloaded, and that's how you communicate back and forth rather than emails. I just got off a call the other day with a partner who they did a lot of work with another partner, a vendor, with really, really large CAD drawings, and you can't email those back and forth. SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business is a great way for you to be able to upload those large 10 gigabyte files and then share the link with them, so they can come to your SharePoint infrastructure and download it without having to email back and forth or set up some kind of a FTP, or file transfer protocol site, which would be an additional cost to what you're already paying for with SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. Sharing with anonymous users, that is only available at a folder or a file level, not at a site level. You couldn't anonymously share an entire site with somebody. And then collaborating with extranet partners, we already kind of talked a little bit about that with Azure B2B. SharePoint Online as an extranet solution. Here's some good things to kind of look at. Again, we've talked about most of this already. I just wanted to have something you guys could read later on to kind of refresh what's going on. Key features in collaboration include, allowing users, whether you want to have your users invite a new user. So when we create a SharePoint site, I'm the administrator and I grant Nathan access. Do I want to allow Nathan to share with other people, or people outside of our organization, or is it just me that's going to be able to share with people outside of our organization? So you can kind of make those choices, as well as restricting or whitelisting, blacklisting domains we already said. And then we can also audit what's going on. So the bad thing about, when we talk about anonymous access, is we can audit that somebody made a change, but because it's anonymous access, we can't audit who made the change. So that's one thing to kind of to bear in mind when we start talking about auditing and reporting. Again, you've already got the infrastructure, so why use Office 365 for your business-to-business extranet sites? Because you've already got the infrastructure, you're already paying for it, so it's going to be a cost savings. We offer secure sharing, seamless collaboration, so the same collaboration, we get the content into the cloud, whoever we've granted access to can work on it. And then the governance and audit reporting, we kind of touched on that last slide a little bit. And
And a
again, I
simple
apologize.
point, John.
Yes, go ahead.
Just interject is a simple way where nearly every company that we encounter is doing some sort of external sharing, but they're typically doing it with like Dropbox or Box or something like that, where
Yep.
you have no control of the security, you have no control who's accessing, you have no control of where that data goes after it's been shared, because it doesn't have any of the capabilities that John just went through. So, so part of this could be as simple as making your team aware of it, so that when those opportunities come up, there is a relatively simple way in which we can, protect the data that's being shared, and being able to control it, audit it, password manage it, do all those kind of things. Because some of this, it doesn't have to be a super complex extranet site that's has all kinds of complex builds and feature sets. It's probably already happening inside your organization today with things like Dropbox and Box, and you just don't have any visibility or control over it. So this is a way where you can accomplish the same objective, but start learning what's happening, and actually, if necessary, in particular from a security perspective, help lock that down a little bit. So again, it's probably already happening in your organization. These are some things even we're looking at inside of our organization, like, are there things, is there shadow IT that's happening because we don't even know what's happening, and can we educate our team and work through tools like this to do a better job of sharing externally.
Great point. So as we move on now, whether you're Azure B2B or extranet collaboration or just internally, there still are some things like where we have some notifications and workflows to help us kind of automate some tasks again. So first thing we kind of talk about is notifications and alerts. So the nice thing about SharePoint is that we can actually set up alerts, or you can set up alerts that maybe you're working on a single document and you want to be alerted when somebody else makes a change to that document. So you can right click and you can get alerted that, hey, anytime somebody makes a change to this document, I'm going to get an email that says, hey, Nate made a change. You want to go look at it, you want to go double check what's going on, etc. Or maybe you're waiting for Nate to complete his change and you're going to get that alert. We can go ahead and set that alert on an entire list as well, a document library. So if maybe, for instance, again, in that extranet scenario, maybe you've created a collaboration site for billings to come in or estimates to come in or whatever comes in from external collaborator, whether it be a vendor or whatever, you can be alerted that anytime somebody uploads something to that library, you get an email saying, hey, something's been uploaded, or you can have it set so that it lets you let John uploaded this document, so you can go out and take a look at it. Or maybe, again, anytime something changes at all, something is uploaded, something is edited, you can get alerted as to what's going on. And it's quick and easy for you to kind of manage your alerts and cancel those alerts as well. So when you're going to create an alert, there's a couple of things that you do, and I'll let you guys read through this slide when you get the deck. But you get to reply who to send these alerts to is kind of a big one. Now, that's a bad screenshot because in SharePoint Online, you're not going to send it to a system account, but this is a screenshot from SharePoint on premises. But the same works the same. You would have your email address in there. Text message, SMS is going to be grayed out because that's not supported right now in online, but you would get an email, and then you can say, I want to get all changes, only when new items are added, etc. And then the big thing is, when do you want these alerts? What do you want to have? Do you want, that's the when people who changes whatever, but the when to send alerts, you can get them immediately. You can get them on a daily summary or on a weekly summary. So you can really kind of get a weekly summary and kind of keep track of what's been going on within a list or library. So with that, now we have, so that's a way to get alerted to what's going on. But then how do we start automating the processes and things of that nature that we have going on in our business? Well, that's where workflows come into play. And out of box, SharePoint Online has 5 different types of workflows that are just available there for you to use. There's an approval workflow, which is just that. I upload a document, I need an approval for maybe it to be become visible for everybody, or I need a new computer, so I need to set up a workflow so that I get approval from my manager. Collect feedback. We can collect some feedback. We can collect signatures. Disposition approval, meaning, hey, we're going to design to help with managing certain tasks. And then there's a 3-state workflow that we're going to go through, 3 states. So there's a very quick and simple workflows to help you walk through out of box, but you can also build extremely complex workflows in SharePoint Designer if you'd like. Now, that sounds a little overwhelming maybe to create complex ones in SharePoint Designer, but it's really not. But there are some majorly, there are some really complex workflows we can create with SharePoint Designer, and I've got a couple internal projects that are really leveraging this. But in SharePoint Designer, we can create a list workflow, meaning I'm going to create a workflow for this list and only this list. We can create a reusable workflow that could be used on other lists and things of that nature, or a site workflow, something that's going to work within this site. And when we're creating these kind of workflows, there's 4 things we're really thinking of: actions, events, conditions, and steps. So what are events? Events are what's happening. Somebody's creating an item in this location. Somebody's editing an item in this location, or I've created a button so that if I want this workflow to run, I can run this workflow on that item and make it happen. Well, and what can these things, so what are these actions and what's going to happen? Well, we can copy, create, or change a list item. We can check the items in and out. Probably one of the more common ones is we can email messages out. We can collect data from other participants, things of that nature. So the event is when are we gonna start this workflow? Action is what kind of action are we going to take? And then we have the ability where we have conditions and steps. So if conditions, think of your kind of your traditional flow chart, if you will. If question A answer is yes, go to the left. If it is no, go to the right. So we can have those conditions. Think of them as if then else statements if you know anything about programming. So if one thing, we're going to do this. If it is not true, then we're going to do that. And then there are also steps that help us kind of create these steps as we go through the workflow, where we can, besides having just if then else statements, we can have conditions where if this is true, continue on to step 2 and do nothing else in step 1, else do what we have going on in step 1 and move on to step 2, or maybe skip over step 2 and go to step 3. So we can create these very, very complex workflows if we'd like. There are some simple out-of-box ones available as well that are a lot easier for you to start using. But once you start using some workflows, I think you'll find that you'll really want to get into SharePoint Designer and see how to use some of these things. Now, the drawback to SharePoint Designer workflows and the workflows out of box in SharePoint is that they only work within SharePoint and on SharePoint things, on documents that are within SharePoint. With Microsoft Flow, we have the ability to do some other automizations, whether they be SharePoint related or not, and we can include SharePoint or not include SharePoint. So we can create things like an automated flow, which means in this example that we kind of have here is that we're going to create a flow that's going to send you an email anytime somebody tweets, this word. Anytime somebody tweets John Horner, I can get an email that says, oh, Nate was tweeting and he mentioned me. We can do a button flow. Back on SharePoint Designer, we talked about we can have a button where people can trigger to start this workflow running on that document. With a button flow, we can have this button flow create the button on like a mobile device, so that in this example, you have a team meeting or team sync coming up in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. You can just click a button on your phone and it will email your team reminding them that they have a team meeting in 5 minutes. We can schedule a flow, meaning we can say, hey, we want to say something happened recurring. If you think of the alerts that we just talked about, you want to send a weekly digest or a daily digest of what's going on and alerts in that list. Similarly here, we can get it to schedule out, send us an email once a day, once an hour, a minute, maybe at a specific date, the 2nd of every month, something like that, or in X number of days. So every 15 days we want it to send, or 15 days from today. And it can send us an email letting us know what's going on. Or business process flows, we can use Microsoft Flow to help us kind of build through and automate some of our business processes as well. So that kind of does it for this session. Again, I apologize. We probably went through it rather quickly, but you will have the slide deck to go back and kind of help you understand anything you may not have missed, or you have Nate to reach out to, and Nate can always reach out to me.
Yeah, thanks, John. I guess one of the things, just to wrap up some of the context, right? We intentionally went through a lot of data points, but when John and I collaborated on what content and what information to share, we wanted to pick out some of the common ways in which people are leveraging SharePoint right out of the box, as well as capabilities and feature sets that might actually help you to solve key problems that you might be having. I mean, right? So it might not be that you're trying to change out your file server, but it might be, gosh, you really wish you had a workflow approval that you could do really easy. And that's something you might be able to do in SharePoint first. Or being able to share documents with a mobile workforce where they've got too much data to put on their individual machine. Well, now with OneDrive, you can actually limit some of that, as John mentioned. Or just trying to control and secure some of the information that you're sharing externally and limit it from going to Dropbox and actually being able to use that in SharePoint. So we're not saying do all of this stuff. We're just wanting to give a high level of some of the capabilities. The next step is really trying to think through it and challenge you as far as, well, how can you take this internally and solve some of the problems in your organization? So John, if you go to the next couple slides, I want to hit on, because it segues into a couple of the things that we're doing to hopefully help you take the next steps. Is one, some of you on the listening right now have already been to these events, but we have some future immersion events where you see the picture there where we set up a small, it's only 10 or 12 people, where we actually help you walk through some of this stuff and you can play with it, right? So you kind of see some of the feature sets, see how you click through it. It's a half-day event that we do. We do them both in Colorado and in Minnesota. We'd happy to have you at our /events page for that. And we do dig into SharePoint a little bit, but it's also how some of the other tools that Office 365 offers and how it integrates. Now, there's these two next sections that are up here. One is, how do you take some of this stuff and figure out, well, what's the top priority and how do you integrate with this? So we have an event in October that does your technology, know your 2019 business plan, is because if there's some of these problems that you might have in your business, how are you going to help prioritize and identify where your technology might be able to help solve some of those problems? Not every business problem is a technology problem, but we want to try and share. We have a panelist, as well as we're doing a demonstration of how we can try and work through connecting your business plan to your technology when it's appropriate. And the last thing is our webinar that we have next month. We actually have a panel of individuals who their job is to help drive productivity and help utilization of some of these tools. And it's really trying to go through 5 steps to drive adoption with your team. So one of the other main questions we get, so that's why we put this session together, and the next one is specifically from feedback from all of you, is, okay, now that I've learned a little bit about what it's capable of doing, like SharePoint, for example, today, and all the things that John covered, how do I drive it inside my organization? How do I actually get adoption with my team and leverage and take advantage of some of these tools? That panel session next month is what we're going to be covering on that topic. So we'd love to have you on that. So going to say thank you for attending. I'm not seeing any questions online, but we'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards. Everyone is going to get a link to the recording. They'll also get links to the information that we shared there, as well as the link to the PDF of the slide deck, so you can reference it in the future. So,
yeah, and if anybody has any questions about this content, shoot an email to Nate. He more than likely can answer it. But if he cannot, that's what I am here for, is to help him tackle those ones where he may not quite know the answer and he needs a little help. That's what I'm here for. Awesome, John. Any final words other than that before we sign off? No, I think you kind of hit it right that, it's a lot of content we talked about, and a lot of, there's no way you want to implement all of this in the next 6 months or a year, but little by little, as you start using it more and more and more, I'd be willing to bet that every one of you would probably within the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, probably be using every single thing I talked about today. That's excellent. Baby steps. What problem are you trying to solve? Solve one of them at a time. Yep. And we're here to help. So thanks a lot, John. I appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise. Thank you for sharing, and we'll sign off, everyone. Have a great day. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.